Find out how England fared against Sri Lanka in the cricket highlights in an hour. First, celebrating the Queen at 90 here on Channel 5. We're taking a look back at the reign of Elizabeth II.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong.
For over 60 years, Queen Elizabeth II has been a constant in our lives.
It demanded an enormous amount of self-sacrifice.
You cannot overemphasise how deep that sense of duty is.
The Queen's history is our history. From her coronation in the post-war days of austerity, she has reigned through Britain's transformation to a multicultural, multimedia nation.
I think the great strength of our monarchy is its ability to adapt.
She's seen it all and done it all, and yet she does remain relevant.
We look back at her incredible reign, telling the story of how she steered the monarchy through the second half of the 20th century and into a new millennium with her calm, quiet sense of duty and remarkable ability to adapt.
Her experience is invaluable, and we're lucky to have her because she's irreplaceable.
Our Queen has been consistent, reliable, never let anyone down. It is a remarkable achievement.
Then came their Royal Highnesses. They're taking the places of the King and Queen who would have gone but for His Majesty's illness.
January the 31st, 1952. King George VI waves off his eldest daughter, Princess Elizabeth, as she and her husband Philip depart for a tour of the Commonwealth, starting in Kenya. It was to be their last goodbye. Just 6 days later, at the Treetops Hotel in the Aberdare National Park, she was told of her father's death. The reign of Queen Elizabeth II had begun.
I can't believe that she didn't slightly suspect that it might be going to happen. So perhaps she braced herself sort of internally for bad news, I don't know. But, I mean, she was faced with a situation that there was no alternative to. She was inevitably now Queen, and she had to behave like that.
I think there is a sort of stoical approach that is natural, that's in her nature, but it's also part of her training. I think she's been trained from a very young age. She had her parents, King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, as shining examples of dedication to public duty.
On her return to British soil, she was greeted not by her family, but by the men at the helm of the country, all of her father's generation and beyond, and all with their own preconceptions of this young 25-year-old queen.
The lasting image of the very beginning of the reign, I think for most of us, was again on newsreels or still photographs in the papers, of seeing the 25-year-old coming down the steps at Heathrow, Prince Philip just behind her, in black, and waiting there were all these old men. I mean, Churchill first of all, from the rear, unmistakably Churchill, then Attlee and Anthony Eden and so on and so forth. They all bowed, and I can't imagine what was going through her mind.
Indeed, as the nation mourned, this young woman faced her first test as Queen, winning the confidence of her Prime Minister, Winston Churchill.
Initially, he wasn't thrilled at the thought of dealing with a new, young, very young woman as his monarch. But when he met her and started having audiences with her, my mother tells me that he very quickly melted. I think what he liked about the Queen was that she obviously had a very clear understanding of the seriousness and the implications of her role and her decisions.
On the 2nd of June 1953, Elizabeth was crowned in a ceremony at Westminster Abbey. It gave Britain's citizens a longed-for moment of glamour amid the gloom of austerity.
I think that the vows that she made at the coronation were deeply religious ones to her, who has a very strong religious faith.
Will you, to the utmost of your power, maintain the laws of God and the true profession of the gospel?
All this I promise to do.
And I think that it's sort of like marrying the nation.
And the Queen, the great ceremony over, returns to pass in procession out of the Abbey into the London which waits to receive her.
It was an extraordinary event, and the news coming that Everest had been climbed almost simultaneously, that sort of gave the feeling that we're on our way, it's going to be okay. And this beautiful young Queen and Prince Philip carrying that off with huge style.
The early years of Elizabeth's reign was a true honeymoon period. It began with a tour of the new Commonwealth formed in the wake of a crumbling empire. Even in those early years, the independence of nations under British rule was seen as inevitable, and the Queen wanted to be sure they would join the Commonwealth and retain her as their monarch. The tour would cover over 40,000 miles and several continents by air, sea, and road. And while there was serious work to be done, there was also time for the Queen to enjoy some truly delightful moments. Of course, while she was Queen, she was also a young mother, and for 6 months during this epic tour, she didn't see either of her children, 5-year-old Prince Charles and 2-year-old Princess Anne, who had been left in the care of the Queen Mother. But for Elizabeth, it was simply part of the role.
With this, we come back again and again to that stern sense of duty that certainly her mother had, and the king, both of them, that the job is more important than your private desires or wishes, and it overrides everything.
The Queen may have had a difficult time balancing parenthood and her work, but she still managed to indulge in one of her greatest passions: horses. It was during the early part of her reign that she enjoyed considerable success at the races. In 1954 and 1957, she was the leading owner. It was a love that went right back to her childhood.
We endlessly played at being horses, because the Queen from an early age was very keen on horses. So we had to be circus horses and carriage horses and any kind of horse I could think, and we trotted and galloped and did all that sort of thing.
After the joy of her coronation and the success of the Commonwealth tour, the mid-50s were a turning point for the Queen. She faced the first controversies of her reign, which, despite being difficult moments, would prove to be the making of her. Her younger sister, Margaret, had been involved in a relationship for some years with Captain Peter Townsend, and although largely liked by the family, he was some 16 years older than Margaret, and more significantly, a divorcee.
It was terribly difficult for the Queen. The Queen is a deeply religious woman, always has been. Divorce was anathema to them, really. But she loved her sister dearly, and she didn't want to stand in her way of what appeared to be true love. A very, very difficult situation for any sister, but particularly if you're Queen.
It was a story the press went wild for, and at times threatened to overshadow the Queen.
When Margaret was spotted flicking a piece of fluff off Peter Townshend's coat just outside the coronation, that actually got more attention on a lot of newspapers than the coronation itself. They went bonkers for it.
When Margaret announced she wanted to marry Townshend, it was quite a shock. With memories of the abdication crisis of 1936 still raw, Winston Churchill informed the Queen that Parliament would not allow the marriage unless Margaret denounced her right to the throne. For the princess, there was a difficult decision to be made. Ultimately, she conceded and released a statement saying that she wouldn't marry Townshend after all. It would be another 5 years before she did finally marry a different man, Anthony Armstrong Jones, in what was the first televised royal wedding. It may have been a difficult few years for the Queen, but still it was a time when open criticism of her was unheard of, making an outburst by one man, Lord Altrincham, in 1957, an incredible event. The aspiring politician wrote an article saying she was out of touch, labelling her a priggish schoolgirl and her style of speaking a pain in the neck. Indeed, those in support of the Queen made quite sure their feelings were known. But his act served to break the unwritten rule of public criticism towards the monarchy and signalled the beginning of the end of deference. The 1960s ushered in an era of huge cultural and social change in Britain and across the world. But as a young woman in the 50s, the Queen had learnt a lot during her most challenging moments. She was therefore able to oversee the smooth reconstruction of the old empire into the new Commonwealth, as a seemingly endless number of countries gained independence.
The Queen was part of the quiet pulling down of the flag. She always behaved with great dignity on these occasions when something was happening which diminished the empire, but which she accepted with great grace.
Indeed, by the 60s, the Queen had matured into office. The trial period was well and truly over. It was a time for two new arrivals to the family. Prince Andrew was born in 1960, along with Edward in 1964. The fact that she'd waited so long for more children was a sign to many that she had settled into her role. It would prove to be a new approach to how the royal family portrayed itself that would help them to move away from the tag of being aloof and out of touch.
I think the great strength of our monarchy is its ability to adapt. It's always adapted through the ages, which is why it survived.
By the end of the 1960s, with the age of deference a distant memory, the palace wanted to be seen to be in touch with the public, while still maintaining an air of mysticism. Using the modern medium of television, royal advisors hoped a big event would re-engage the public with the royals and their heritage. The investiture of Prince Charles as the Prince of Wales seemed like the perfect opportunity, even if it seemed somewhat at odds with the spirit of the time.
And faith and truth I will bear unto thee, to live and die against all manner of folks.
I can remember being up on the ramparts, which is where, as a television reporter, one had to go, you were corralled up there. But I saw the Queen and Prince Philip exchanging a sly smile and a little glint in their eye as the Queen placed the crown on Charles's head. And I wondered, and I've wondered ever since, you know, whether she thought it was all a little bit of a joke or not. I don't think we're ever going to see that sort of ceremony again. I will guarantee that Prince William will never, ever be subjected to that sort of rigmarole.
But while using the power of television was important, in 1970, on a trip to New Zealand and Australia, the Queen and the family did something that changed her relationship with the public forever. She broke with tradition to begin the walkabout.
I think the Queen saw that you had to be accessible, that people no longer placed their politicians, their monarchy, their church leaders, they no longer placed them on pedestals. They wanted to see them in the flesh. And I think the Queen understood that big time, which was why we had the walkabouts.
She'll break the ice in asking what they do, and she'll have a conversation, and she's got an inbuilt mechanism that says after about 2 or 3 minutes, right, time to move on. And she will try and give everybody a few seconds of quality time. Civilians, she will give, and I've timed this, about 25 seconds of quality time, and the military she'll give about 20 seconds. And that is the recipient's moment of a one-to-one with the head of state.
But just as the Queen was breaking down barriers, the country faced mounting problems. Northern Ireland was gripped by intense sectarian violence. Britain was facing power cuts, strikes, and a winter of discontent. Unemployment topped the 1 million mark for the first time since the 1930s.
When the country changes or when the country is in recession, then obviously it's worrying for the monarch. It has to be. She has to be concerned about this, what is happening to people. The 70s was a very dark period, particularly perhaps in retrospect, but it was pretty grim at the time.
Indeed, it was a more dangerous time for the Queen and her family. They were now targets in the IRA's increasingly bloody bombing campaign, aimed at securing Irish reunification.
I have no doubt that it would have been, for some terrorists, an extraordinary coup to have assassinated a member of the royal family.
And I've been with former IRA men who admit that they did plot and plan to do harm to members of the royal family and possibly the Queen herself.
But echoing her mother and father's refusal to abandon Buckingham Palace after it was bombed in 1944, Queen Elizabeth rejected all offers of additional protection, even though she was well aware of the threat.
I mean, I can remember very well going out riding with her at Sandringham some years, quite a lot of years ago. And it was this sort of time of the year there. And there was a thick, thick white mist over everything. And we were plodding along on our horses, and she said, I just heard this morning that the IRA have got a new fancy weapon that somehow sees through fog. And that was the end of that conversation, and we went on cantering. So, I mean, you know, she knew there were possibilities.
Amidst these difficulties, in 1977, it was the Queen's Silver Jubilee. There was a fear that at a time of national austerity, any expensive celebrations would be inappropriate. It left many people wondering whether the event would be a flop or a welcome distraction.
Some people had reservations about how it should be celebrated. And amongst those people who had reservations was the Queen herself. That it was a time of economic difficulty, but we just knew it would be the most wonderful time.
Suddenly everybody's putting out their bunting. Individual flats and houses are depending flags out of windows. Everybody's arranging street parties, talking to neighbours they've scarcely known, long trestle tables, kids sort of really enjoying it. And quite suddenly the whole nation is partying, and we're partying courtesy of the monarch.
It was a huge success, and she herself was touchingly moved by how much the country showed that it appreciated her. She's very humble, the Queen. I think people understand that, and that's part of the reason why she's become so popular.
I want to thank all those in Britain and the Commonwealth who, through their loyalty and friendship, have given me strength and encouragement during these last 25 years.
My thanks go also to the many thousands who have sent me messages of congratulations on my Silver Jubilee.
By the early 80s, the pressure on the Queen's eldest son and heir, Prince Charles, now in his early 30s, to find a wife was intense. Just 28 days after he was first introduced to Lady Diana Spencer, they were engaged.
Can you find the words to sum up how you feel today, both of you?
Difficult to find that sort of word, isn't it, really? Just delighted and happy. And I'm amazed that she's been brave enough to take me on.
And I suppose in love.
Of course.
Whatever in love means.
On the 29th of July, 1981, Charles married Diana in a royal wedding witnessed by a worldwide audience of 750 million people.
I, Diana Frances,
I, Diana Frances,
take thee, Charles Philip Arthur George,
take thee, Philip Charles Arthur George,
to my wedded husband.
to my wedded husband.
The nation was in the grip of royal fever, and media focus shifted away from the Queen onto the younger generation of royals.
The wedding meant everything to the Queen because it was the succession. It was everything that she had sacrificed a great deal of personal happiness for coming to fruition.
1 year after the royal wedding, Prince William was born, followed 2 years later by his brother Harry. It marked an extremely happy time for the Queen.
The birth of Prince William and then Prince Harry was obviously an extremely important moment for the monarchy, because monarchy needs heirs, and also for the family itself. Everyone likes to have young children around, so it was a very happy time, the early 80s, for the Queen Mother as a great-grandmother and for the Queen herself as a grandmother.
The early 80s saw the Queen's role as a mother cross paths with her position as head of the armed forces when Prince Andrew went to war on the Falkland Islands.
Of course you would have worried, but you would also, I'm sure, have thought about all the other mothers who were worrying about many other sons as well. Certainly I don't think it would have crossed the Queen's mind to have made any special case for Prince Andrew. But the monarchy representing the nation as a whole is the focus, and that's the essence, I think, of the relationship.
The Queen had ignored Margaret Thatcher's concerns, insisting he go out and serve. The royals have a long and proud military history, something the Queen is well aware of. Andrew returned safely, and his marriage to Sarah Ferguson in 1986 was another great event for the Queen. However, the happy family occasions of the 80s would soon give way to more troubled times in the early 90s, as the marriages of the Queen's children crumbled.
When I became royal correspondent in 1989, I had no idea what I was letting myself in for. In fact, actually, it was sold to me as a bit of a graveyard, they said. So I thought, well, I don't know why I'm doing this job, but I'd give it a go. And then all hell seemed to break loose.
The year 1992 marked the 40th anniversary of the Queen's succession to the throne. However, she wanted no fuss. On the actual day in February, she spent it with cancer patients in Norfolk. Only this 62 gun salute by the Thames marked the occasion. In March, it was announced her second son, Andrew, would separate from his wife, Sarah. Weeks later, her daughter, the Princess Royal, formally ended her marriage to Captain Mark Phillips. But while these separations were in the main amicable, it was the marriage of her eldest and heir to the throne that was about to capture the attention, as Charles and Diana also decided to split.
I think one of the great disappointments for the Queen, especially as a woman who is a woman of faith, has been the failure of 3 out of 4 marriages of her children.
So what was the relationship between Diana and the Queen like?
Her door was always open to both her son, the Prince of Wales, and to Diana as well, right through the most difficult periods. her door was always open, and in that sense, she wanted to do what was best.
As if the controversy surrounding the private lives of her children hadn't tested the Queen's resolve enough, on the morning of the 20th of November, her 45th wedding anniversary, there was another disaster to contend with.
There are no words that can describe this scene. The sky aglow above Windsor tonight as 1,000 years of history takes flame.
A spotlight had been placed too close to a curtain, starting a fire that raged through the castle. Over 200 firemen battled to save one of the country's most famous buildings and one of the Queen's most treasured homes.
I was alongside the Queen, and it was quite devastating, because when you've been brought up with that castle all your life, I mean, the Queen used to use the castle as a child, lived in the castle during the war years, and it forms a second home.
Despite suffering such a personal misfortune and clearly feeling the effects of a cold, the Queen remained pragmatic, dealing with the situation in the same composed manner we'd come to expect.
You could see her in that caped mackintosh, this sort of small figure, surrounded by these massive firemen looking even more massive. But if you look carefully at her face at that time, obviously a great deal of concern, but also a kind of calmness. There's no sense of frenzy at all there, but clearly shocked by what was happening.
Just 4 days later, her voice still croaky from the effects of a cold and the Windsor smoke, she prepared to address the Guildhall at a lunch to mark her 40-year reign.
1992 is not a year on which I shall look back with undiluted pleasure. In the words of one of my more sympathetic correspondents, it has turned out to be an annus horribilis.
I think the Annus Horribilis speech in that particular period showed the Queen at her most vulnerable, but also at her most human as well.
I sometimes wonder how future generations will judge the events of this tumultuous year. I dare say that history will take a slightly more moderate view than that of some contemporary commentators.
Indeed, with hindsight, the Queen was right. But the events of 1992 would be the catalyst for a huge amount of change. While the stench of burnt wood hung over Windsor Castle for days, the lingering fallout from the fire was to be even more significant and last even longer. Initially, the government said they would meet the bill.
The nation felt very different about that, and there was a massive outcry. For the Queen, it was further embarrassment, further humiliation. It just couldn't have been worse for her.
After the boom years of the 80s, Britain was suffering a major hangover, with repossessions mounting and dole queues lengthening. The economic situation, added to the recent royal domestic troubles, left many wondering why taxpayers should be burdened with the cost of rebuilding Windsor. An attempt to raise money through a public fund raised only £25,000. Elsewhere, the Queen had already sensed the mood of the public and made plans to save them money, having decided to pay tax.
I would say that that's part of the phoenix rising from the ashes, that out of this sort of massive setback and shock of the fire at Windsor, came a decision which has been very good and very robust for a modern monarchy. The Queen pays tax like everybody else.
1992 may have been described as her annus horribilis, but to many, the way the Queen overcame the challenges she faced simply showed her remarkable dedication to duty.
Her own sterling qualities and virtues of, as I say, stubbornness. I use that word actually quite advisedly, because there's a sense in which I'm going to carry on serving. And she came out of what appeared in the beginning of the 90s to be a pretty horrible decade to something that was quite striking later on.
In this time, while the Queen may have had domestic problems, Around the world, she remained hugely popular and symbolically important as the head of the Commonwealth. In 1992, she visited a reunited Germany, walking through the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. 2 years later, the Queen became the first British monarch to step foot in Russia, the very heart of communism during the Cold War. In 1995, she made another historic trip, visiting South Africa for the first time since 1947. After long years of defiant isolation, the country had abandoned its apartheid government, become a fully democratic country, and been readmitted to the Commonwealth.
I would very spontaneously say that it was the highlight of my time as press secretary over 7 years in the 90s. I mean, it was a marvellous visit.
The state visit to South Africa was just undiluted joy. It really was. From the moment that Britannia sailed into Cape Town, a glorious morning, and looking just the part, absolutely the part. And Nelson Mandela was there on the quayside where I was, jiggling around. He couldn't contain himself. He was so excited that the Queen was coming. And the Queen herself was excited to be back in South Africa after the best part of 50 years.
I shall never forget the welcome you have given us. We shall take back in a new form an old message. Faith can move mountains. Faith can recreate a nation.
That trip to South Africa was one of the last in which the Royal Yacht Britannia played a starring role, after the decision was taken when Tony Blair's Labour Party came to power in 1997 not to replace the retiring vessel. The decommissioning ceremony took place later that year. For all those involved, it was obviously an emotional day, from the crew, their Commodore Anthony Morrow, and even the Queen herself so clearly fighting back the tears.
And I think it was a sad moment when it had to be decommissioned. And I think one of the few times when we've all seen, you know, the crack of emotion in the Queen's face.
It was amazing to see the Queen so close to tears, if not welling up actually, when Britannia was decommissioned. That was probably her first and only public tear. I think it was very insightful, and those sorts of moments really do capture the hearts of the nation, because we're not used to seeing her vulnerable, we're used to seeing her in charge.
We have reports from Paris that Diana, Princess of Wales, has been killed in a car accident, and that her partner, Dodi Fayed, has also been killed.
On an August night in 1997, tragedy struck in Paris. The royal family was at Balmoral, and Diana's death was as great a shock to them as it was to the rest of the world. But this did not show and was not perceived. It was a misunderstanding that led to the most critical moment of the Queen's reign.
I remember a lady in waiting phoning me and saying, we're getting so many criticisms from the public about what the Queen is doing. People are saying, we must have the Queen back here in London to be with us. And the press were crying out. But it always struck me from that moment, somehow the cry, we must have the Queen with us in London, was a cry that indicated how much she was loved by everybody, how everybody wanted her to be there to make sense of what was going on. And I thought the Queen got it absolutely right. The two boys needed separation. They needed to have that security and stability.
5 days after Diana's death, the Queen did return to London with her family. But what would the reaction be towards the Queen and Philip when they arrived at Buckingham Palace? No one knew what to expect.
I remember my heart beating as the Queen arrived in London and got out of the car, and you thought, what is going to happen? And, you know, are any missiles, buns or anything going to be thrown at her? But in fact, she inspected the flowers outside the palace, and then she went over and talked to someone, and suddenly you realised it was going to be all right. No one was going to turn against her. But they were very difficult, dark and dangerous days.
When she did arrive at Buckingham Palace, there was applause for her. And when she left to go back into the building, there was applause for her. And then, at 6 o'clock, she did the live broadcast, paying tribute to Diana.
What I say to you now, as your queen and as a grandmother, I say from my heart. First, I want to pay tribute to Diana myself. She was an exceptional and gifted human being. In good times and bad, she never lost her capacity to smile and laugh, nor to inspire others with her warmth and kindness.
It was perhaps the most intimate the Queen has got with the nation in a public broadcast of that type. And that, I think, really helped to reassure people, look, at the end of the day, she's head of state, but she's also a woman who cares too. And that really helped rehabilitate her image in what was a very difficult time for her.
The next day, an estimated 2.5 billion people around the world watched the funeral. As the procession came by Buckingham Palace, the Queen led out the other members of the royal family to pay their respects. Two months later, in November, the Queen and Prince Philip celebrated their golden wedding anniversary. The previous 5 years had possibly been the hardest of the Queen's reign, but here was a moment for her to pay tribute to her husband.
All too often, I fear Prince Philip has had to listen to me speaking. Frequently, we have discussed my intended speech beforehand, and as you will imagine, his views have been expressed in a forthright manner. He is someone who doesn't take easily to compliments, but he has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years.
They are a very comfortable couple together, very devoted. And I think one of the secrets of their happy marriage is that the Queen, very wisely, in my view, made a decision many years ago to let Philip wear the trousers at home, in every sense. And so while he accepts that he has to walk a couple of paces behind and bow to her in public because she's the star of the show, in private, he runs the estates, he has the decisions to be made about the estates. You know, he's top dog. And that's very clever of the Queen.
As the world prepared to celebrate the dawn of a new millennium, the Queen could look ahead with optimism. She'd survived the trials and tribulations of the 90s and had demonstrated her ability to adapt. A decade after the Queen's Annus Horribilis, there was another momentous year, a time of conflicting emotions. In February, her sister Margaret died after a stroke. The following month, the Queen Mother also passed away. Just weeks later, she began her UK Golden Jubilee tour. With typical stoicism, she continued with her duty, travelling across the country to thank the public for their support, while people were keen to show their appreciation for her. It culminated with spectacular scenes in the Mall, as more than 1 million people gathered in front of Buckingham Palace.
Gratitude, respect and pride. These words sum up how I feel about the people of this country and the Commonwealth, and what this Golden Jubilee means to me.
It's easy to forget sometimes that the Queen is getting older. 2 knee operations in 2003 were a sign of some wear and tear, but in general, she's shown remarkable stamina. In this youth-obsessed time, the Queen can be seen as a shining light for what the older generation can achieve. Of course, with age comes wisdom and experience. The Queen is the most widely travelled world leader in history and has shared the stage with a host of the world's most iconic figures, including 7 popes and 12 US presidents. It seems astonishing to think that when the Queen came to the throne aged 25, she was the young monarch needing advice from such an elder statesman as Winston Churchill. David Cameron is her 12th Prime Minister and first to be related to her, albeit as a 5th cousin twice removed. Now, however, he is the one more likely to use her counsel at the PM's weekly meetings with the Queen.
Prime Ministers say that their meetings with her once a week are invaluable because she does have her finger on the pulse. Look, somebody's been in the job for 60 years and knows what's going on. Finger must be on the pulse. She must know that something happening, say, this year, well, hang on a minute, something similar happened about 20 years ago.
And yet the Queen continues to look forward, adapt, modernise and make history. In particular, her first visit to the Irish Republic still showed her immense value as a symbol of goodwill. It was during her trip to Australia that the Queen appeared to give a rare political comment as she showed her support for advancing women's roles in society, just as the monarchy made one of its most significant changes, amending the Act of Succession.
What the Queen's done that is going to be very important for generations to come in terms of the British monarchy is to allow a firstborn daughter to accede to the throne. I find that unexpectedly moving because this country's most successful monarchs have all been women. Queen Elizabeth, Queen Victoria and Queen Elizabeth II.
The Queen marked the 60th anniversary of her accession to the throne with a low-key visit to King's Lynn in Norfolk. Speaking at Westminster Hall in March, as a stained glass window commissioned for the Jubilee was unveiled, she rededicated herself to the service of the country.
We are reminded here of our past. I have been privileged to witness some of that history, and with the support of my family, rededicate myself to the service of our great country and its people, now and in the years to come.
After more than 60 years as our monarch, she remains as committed as ever to continuing her life of duty.
I remember talking to her once, and when I handed in my resignation, which you have to do at the end of your time as Archbishop, and she received it, and she said with a kind of sigh, well, that's something I can't do. And it wasn't a reluctant thing. I think it was a sense in which she said, my job is to carry on doing this, and I'm going to do it to the best of my ability, which she has done.
I think the first word that comes to mind about the Queen always is a sense of duty.
She's seen it all and done it all, and yet she does remain relevant. And I think that's because she's constantly adapted and modernised.
Someone who's reflected the vicissitudes of a family and of a nation over the last 60 years.
There's a sort of continuity, and I think people like me who try to be patriotic, we're kept going to some extent by that sense of continuity.
Her experience is invaluable, and we're lucky to have her because she's irreplaceable.
A queen of faith, of humanity, of love and tolerance. And she will be long remembered for somebody who lived an outstanding life at the most difficult points of the 20th century.
Sri Lanka were looking comfortable, so were England able to get the early break they needed today. With all the action from the third day of the final Test match here on Channel 5, it's the cricket highlights next.